I'm Jason UFC, and today we have a story about UFC middleweight champion Sean Strickland reacts after booking a UFC middleweight title fight against Dricus Du Plessis at UFC 297. This is when Sean Strickland says, I didn't want to fight in January or in Canada. Uh-oh. Sean Strickland has reacted to the news that he will be defending his UFC middleweight title in the main event of UFC 297 on January 20th, 2024 in Toronto, Canada against Dricus Du Plessis. On Monday afternoon, UFC CEO Dana White announced that Sean Strickland will headline UFC 297 against Dricus Du Plessis in a UFC middleweight championship fight. It will be the first time Sean Strickland defends his middleweight title, but according to the champion, Sean Strickland, he says he did not want to fight in January, nor did he want to fight in Canada. Uh-oh. Okay, this is what Sean Strickland says. Well, Canada, time to bring you all some freedom. I guess he's saying, I didn't want to fight in January, nor did I want to fight in Canada, but was asked to help a couple of ladies do their jobs, and okay, I'm not gonna say that part. Okay. And this is what Sean Strickland said on Twitter. Why Canada, GSP, George St. Pierre, you do this BS? I don't know why calling out George St. Pierre, but okay. No guns, no freedom of speech, UFC, you blank with me. Okay, that's interesting. UFC announced that Pennington versus Silva was for the vacant women's bantamweight title. That was the only fight that was announced for UFC 297. I guess that got a little bit of blowback, and people were just like, no way possible. So they had to throw in another title fight. Originally, it was announced that it would be the main event, but after the weekend, UFC has now made UFC middleweight champion Sean Strickland versus Dricus Du Plessis for the middleweight championship belt. Okay, yeah, that's basically Dricus Du Plessis is coming off his biggest win of his career when he scored a second round TKO over former UFC middleweight champion Robert Whitaker back in July. Wow, so this is a great story. I got to be honest. A lot of people, I'm an MMA casual, so I don't follow everything that happens in MMA. My entire Twitter timeline is not, UFC related, but I do try to keep up with the sport. A lot of people, like myself, was saying that Dricus Du Plessis definitely deserved the UFC middleweight championship fight. Hamza Chimaev just fought Kamaru Usman in a majority decision victory for Hamza Chimaev. I think it came out, he said he had torn ligaments in his hands. I believe that's what they said. After the fight, I think he thought his hand was broken, but I think the news just came out that Hamza Chimaev has like torn ligaments in his hand. So he's going to be out for a few months, right? So you have a fight like this. You didn't have Sean Strickland booked. You didn't have Dricus Du Plessis booked. When the rankings came out for Hamza Chimaev, he's ranked number number 9 or something? I think it was 7 or 9. He was ranked way, way, way back in the UFC middleweight division. So it really, really was difficult to have him get a title shot after that performance versus a welterweight. And then he's ranked like number 7 or number 9, and then you give him the title shot. Especially with a new champion. Jared Cannonier already has a victory over Sean Strickland. Kamaru Usman had a victory over Sean Strickland, so that would have kind of made some sense. But it makes the most sense with Dricus Du Plessis coming off of a TKO victory over Robert Whitaker in the second round. This wasn't a lay and pray majority decision victory. This wasn't a unanimous decision victory. This wasn't a split decision victory. Dricus Du Plessis went in there, took out Robert Whitaker, former UFC middleweight champion Robert Whitaker, in the second round. And then you had Hamza Chimaev fight Kamaru Usman, who came in on like 10 days notice, 2 welterweights, right? It would be very difficult for UFC to give the championship fight to Hamza Chimaev, especially with the other news of Israel Adesanya taking a break. You could kind of see, like, the UFC really, really being angry about Dricus Du Plessis' situation and saying, you know what, we're going to make Dricus Du Plessis fight Israel Adesanya next. Not the greatest fight, but it would have made some sense. But Dricus Du Plessis at this point has no other contenders that he should fight. Maybe Jared Cannonier. That could be an interesting number one contendership. But I was saying it after Dricus Du Plessis defeated Robert Whittaker. It didn't make sense for him to fight the number one contender. And 6 weeks later, he fought in July. They scheduled Israel Adesanya fight in September. It would be very difficult for anyone, after taking out the number one contender to fight Israel Adesanya in 2 months later. So that didn't make any sense. He didn't duck Israel Adesanya in September. He was injured after defeating Robert Whittaker in the second round. So now it makes sense. We get Dricus Du Plessis versus Sean Strickland. With Sean Strickland coming out saying he didn't want to take this fight in January, nor did he want to take this fight in Canada. There's a lot of people saying that the UFC doesn't like Sean Strickland. They didn't want him to be champion, and now they're giving him this fight. So there's going to be some talks of that. But you know what, Sean Strickland, when he won the championship, he went over to Australia, and he was cheered. I know he's booing. He's kind of talking crazy about Canada right now. But, when he went to a different country in Australia, he was cheered. He was loved. So I don't know if he's going to get a little bit of heat. Is he, or is he going to endear himself to the Canadian fans like he did in Australia, truthfully. But let me know your opinion of this fight. Who do you think is going to win? I got to go with Dricus Du Plessis. I'm not his biggest fan, but, I didn't really like the narrative after the fight versus Robert Whittaker. You had a lot of fans in the comment section saying, Dricus Du Plessis was ducking Israel Adesanya. To me, I didn't like that narrative. Like I said, even though I'm an MMA casual, I cannot think of many number one contenders being forced to fight the champion, 6 weeks later, 2 months later. Like very, very, very few times has that happened. I know people step on 10 days notice, last minute notice, but very rarely has the UFC said, we're going to have a number one contendership fight, and the winner of this fight has to fight the champion in their hometown 2 months later. Like, that just hasn't happened many times in the UFC history. So I'm happy Dricus Du Plessis finally is going to get his title shot. This is going to be a really, really, really good fight, and I am favoring Dricus Du Plessis to defeat Sean Strickland and become the UFC middleweight champion. And then we have a whole story about after that, like what happens with Izzy. Izzy said he was going to come back in 2027. Does he come back sooner after this victory? Does Dricus Du Plessis call out someone after this victory, or does Dricus, or you would think obviously it would be Dricus Du Plessis versus, I guess, Hamza Chimaev probably would be. I'm assuming that Hamza Chimaev is probably the number one contender for the winner of this fight, which, that's fine. I'll be fine with that. That's cool. But let me know your opinion of this story. I'm Jason, UFC. We got good justice today. I'm very happy that Dricus Du Plessis will be fighting Sean Strickland for the UFC middleweight championship at UFC 297 in basically 2 months, right? It's basically 2 months from now, a little bit more than 2 months. But let me know your opinion of this story. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the $1 donation button. And please tune in to the next video on this channel. Thanks a million for watching.